Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, 7 Tips for a Successful Internal Food Safety Audit. My name is Holly Cardozo. I'm a member of the marketing team for SIA Global, and I'm pleased to welcome you today. Before we begin, I'll just speak to a few moderator slides here. Firstly, just note that everyone who's attended will be automatically placed on mute during the webinar. If you'd like to engage with us during the presentation, I invite you to do so either by entering your question in the question and answer box. It's located in the top right-hand corner of your screen. Just click on the box, enter your question, and you can collapse that to the right of your screen by clicking on those 3 small arrows. And I invite you to do so as you think of them so that we have some time to collect the questions, and we'll speak to as many as we can at the end of the presentation. We have 2 polls today, so we will capture your response and share with the group so you can see where you sit amongst your peers. And of course, we're recording the webinar, and we will be available. We'll share the link for the recording as well as the slide deck within a few business days after the webinar. Our presenter today is Dr. Bob Strong. He is a senior consultant with SIA Global, lots of experience in food safety operations in the areas of GMP and GFSI programs, a wealth of experience across the industry working with all kinds of organizations, small and large, and one of our trainers as well. With that, Dr. Bob, I'll kick it over to you.
Holly, thanks so much, and welcome to everybody who is joining us for this complimentary webinar. We hope that you'll get great value out of it. The subject today, of course, is talking about internal auditing. So what I'm going to try and give you some tips from my point of view on what will help you do internal audits, make them successful, get the benefits out of them. So we are going to talk about an audit team, how you validate your audit scope, so how do you pick what you're going to audit when you're going to audit, the frequencies at which you're going to do those audits, auditing hotspots. Obviously, hotspots, we'll talk about what those are, how to sample records, so you're looking at your records to make sure that you catch problems before your GFSI auditor or a regulator catches the problems, documenting with efficacy, so we'll talk about some things that you need to do a little less frequently, but you still need to do it. And then what are you going to do with the audit non-conformities that you're going to discover when you do these audits? So I've got a poll that Holly's going to ask you first of all to do, and so we get a feel for who's on the call.
Yeah, sure. This is hopefully help you set the tone, Dr. Bob, as you move here. So let me launch it here, and I'll read through the responses. You can select multiple responses. So what is your greatest challenge in conducting our internal audits? Perhaps it's acquiring commitment from other people to help. So maybe you don't have a team, and that's a challenge. Ensuring that management views them as an asset rather than extra work. Getting the right support to do the RCA determinations. Finding support on determining the corrective action, preventive actions for non-conformities. So I'll leave you to respond for about 30 seconds here. And again, you can select multiple responses. Dr. Bob, what's your estimation? Where do you think that folks have the greatest challenge?
I think getting other people to help them do the internal audits and do them seriously and put the value into them so that the results help with the continuous improvement.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, about 10 more seconds here, and I'll share the results. Actually, that was Quest. Okay, very good. So let me share here. So 60% said acquiring commitment from other people, unsurprisingly, to your point, but a pretty even spread across the others. So lots of common pain points.
Well, thanks for that information, because that certainly leads me into my first bullet point, which is to build an internal audit team. You do not want to be the only auditor. You want to have as many different eyes as you can get, a minimum of 3 people, depending on the size of your company. You may be able to get more if you're a really big company, but I would say a minimum of 3. And you need to have cross-functional people. So you need people who represent sanitation and people who represent maintenance and people who represent production and QA. And therefore, you've got a good cross-section of people to look at all the things. One of these people needs to have had formal training in how to conduct an audit. So make sure that somebody's gone to an outside class and got formal training. The rest of the team then can be trained by that person. Ideally, I would suggest you have one person on your team goes and gets some formal training in root cause analysis. Whether you're going to do the 5 whys, or you're going to do the fishbone, or you're going to have some other scheme, it really helps if you've got some training on how to do those, because they're not that easy, but once you get them working, they work real well. But if you don't know how to do root cause analysis, you're not going to get to the underlying problem when you discover a nonconformity. Remember, you cannot audit your own work. So make sure, again, you have a cross-functional team. Otherwise, you're going to be auditing some of your own work. So let's talk about validating the audit scope. So what are you going to audit? We're going to have to, unfortunately for GFSI, you're going to have to audit everything. Programs, policies, procedures, processes, records. In other words, there is nothing you don't audit at least once a year. And in order to do that, you obviously need a cross-functional team, because you need to delegate the work off to people who are going to have to step away from their normal roles in order to do this auditing. How frequently are you going to do the auditing? I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but it's going to be based on risk. Some things you're going to audit maybe as much as 4 times a year, and other things you're only going to audit once a year. Now, in order to make people feel like they've got time to do these internal audits on your audit team, then you need to make them manageable. And I found that an audit that's about 1 to 3 hours, depending on what you're trying to achieve, is about the maximum size audit you want to do. Otherwise, people get distracted, they get pulled off doing the audit, they get tired of doing the audit, whatever reasons, and you can't keep auditing for more than 1 to 3 hours when this isn't your only job that you've got during the day. So what should your audit formats be? Well, they're going to be specific to the part of the food safety program that you want to audit at that time. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The frequency, as I said, is going to be based on risk. The more a risk it is to you getting in trouble with a regulator, or getting people sick, or putting out product that's been recalled, then the more frequently you're going to audit to make sure you are in compliance. Hotspots, therefore, are done more often. But don't try to audit the whole system in one go just to fulfill the requirement for GFSI that says you're supposed to audit everything once a year. Then it's not going to have the value. It's not. It's not going to have the attention to it. People are going to skip over things in order to get to the end of the audit, because your auditor comes in and spends a day, 2 days doing all this. I don't think any of you on an internal audit team has 2 days to step away from your job and do nothing but do an internal audit. So what is the right audit frequency that I should audit these different small audits? Well, obviously, you've got to make sure you're not having any problems with complying with FSMA, USDA, or CFIA regulations. And that is in addition to meeting the mandatory requirements or elements that are within whichever GFSI audit you've chosen. But then we always have that third thing, and that is your customer's requirements. So most of you are obviously doing a product that meets the regulatory requirements, meets the GFSI requirements, and meets the customer requirements. And you have to decide what is the frequency for these based on the risk to me. You don't want to get in trouble with a regulator. You don't want to lose a lot of points on your GFSI audit because you didn't catch something and the GFSI auditor catches it. And you certainly don't want to be out of compliance with your customer, who is the only one who buys your product. So I've taken several here so we can discuss a little what you should do here. Obviously, you've got food safety plans. FDA calls them food safety plans. USDA and CFIA calls them HACCP plans. FDA also calls them HACCP plans if they're things like juice, low acid canning, or seafood. Well, obviously, you want to be looking at those things more frequently than once a year. You want to be looking at them at least 4 times a year, looking for deviations, looking for recording issues, problems where people wrote stuff down that wasn't what it needed to be, yet nobody appeared to record it and held the product. Where you did catch things, your production people did, or your QA people did, then you're auditing to see if they did root cause analysis, And if they did corrective actions, and all those in writing. Now here in USA, the FDA now requires all of that to be in writing when they come in to look at all your records, which they couldn't do prior to the Food Safety Modernization Act going into effect. So again, you want to catch this stuff before the regulator catches it, before the GFSI auditor catches it, and before obviously a lawyer catches it. In some areas, you have to do environmental monitoring. Now that doesn't apply to all of you, but it certainly does apply here in America now to those people making ready-to-eat product. Both the FDA and the USDA require you to be doing environmental monitoring if you're making ready-to-eat product. And therefore, I would be reviewing my environmental monitoring records, my procedures, my corrective actions for all of that on at least, again, a 4 times a year basis to make sure it's not getting away from me, that I'm not having repeat pathogens in the packaging area, that I'm not in danger of having contaminated products out there, and I'm not going to have the FDA come in and possibly react to it negatively and maybe close me down. So do I have all this well documented? Do I have all of the corrective actions documented? Is the problem going away? Next hot issue with the FDA currently right now is obviously allergen controls. Half our recalls are due to allergens. So reviewing your cleaning programs to make sure you don't have cross contact, storage programs, etc., etc. Looking at your allergen labels, which have never been given the attention in the past they should have done, and nobody ever made them a critical control point before in a HACCP program, but now the FDA is making it an allergen preventive control and has elevated it to a much higher level than the FDA had it before. Because we've got to stop the recalls. Half our recalls, just about, are allergens. The other part is Listeria monocytogenes, which is used in an environmental problem. And the last but not least is Salmonella, which quite often is, again, another problem with Salmonella in your packaging room when you're packing off a ready-to-eat product. Judging how clean your equipment is obviously your pre-op team. So it'd be good to go out and look over the shoulders of your pre-op team, again, 3 or 4 times a year, just to see if they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're actually doing pre-ops the way you've told them to do it. They're recording them. And then you're not getting repeat cleanliness issues, because if you are, then you need to be looking at your training programs, your trainer, the skills of the people doing the cleaning. Because if pre-op keeps identifying cleaning issues every morning, you have to feel that you're going to miss some of that and you're going to have some contaminated product. So as your documentation of your pre-ops there. Now we know that SQF has just asked their auditors to come in on pre-op and to come in on sanitation. And if you're SQF certified and you didn't notice that, it's in addition 8, it's in effect now. So expect your auditor to come in now on pre-op and sanitation. One of the things the FDA has said that some of it is due to lack of training of the sanitation people. Maybe having supervisors on sanitation who don't have the skill levels they need to have. Be better that you catch this again than it is caught by a GFSI auditor, caught by a regulator, or lack of doing pre-op properly results in you having to recall a product because it got contaminated, maybe with an allergen, maybe with a bacteria. FDA is now identified in the leading into Food Safety Modernization Act that 60% of your problems happened due to your suppliers. The FDA does not want to hear you saying my supplier caused me my problem anymore. They want to make sure you have a very solid approved supplier program. Well, part of that is to make sure that you get annual audits from them, or you do sampling and testing, or you evaluate every year their food safety programs. So make sure you've got documentation on that to back up this approved supplier program, particularly if the supplier is controlling a hazard that you can't control, and your customer, if there is another customer rather than the consumer, can't control it either. And therefore, you're never going to push the hazard down to the consumer. So if you can't control it, you have to have your supplier control it. So where's your documentation that they're doing that? Has your supplier been involved in recalls? Maybe not recalls of ingredients they supply you, but recalls of ingredients they supply other people. That would indicate they have some food safety issues. If they have food safety issues, have you been keeping on top of that? So when you do the internal audits of your approved suppliers, are you looking to see if they've had any issues? Are they on the FDA recall list, the USDA recall list, the CFIA lists? Have they had any other types of problems, like an FDA warning letter? Have they been very slow in providing you with information when you send out those questionnaires and say, hey, and for you to be an approved supplier to me, I need all of this information, and I want to make sure the audit's done by an approved auditor who's gone through the preventive controls for human foods, and I want this information about your corrective actions and root causes on any non-conformities in your third-party audit. Are they very slow in giving you that? Maybe that's a warning sign that either they haven't done anything, or 2, they're not about to do anything, or 3, they'd rather you didn't know they're having issues. But you can't afford to let your supplier, who's controlling a hazard, not give you as much information as possible for you to be sure that they're controlling a hazard. FDA requires you to do that now. When things go wrong, we have to go find things. So how good are your traceability records? How good are your employees in writing down the correct lot number off the bag, the pail, the box that they're dumping? Well, when you look at the records, you find out they're writing down a product identification number that has something to do with designating it as flour, but not the actual lot number. Well, wouldn't it be good to catch that pretty quickly and get it corrected? Yes, your verifier is supposed to be doing that, but maybe the verifier is having a problem because all these records have to be verified. So you are doing a check of the verifier as well as a check of the employee who's writing down the lot numbers. When you do those traceability tests, can you find all of the ingredients? So when you start off with 100 pounds, can you find where the 100 pounds went, or 1,000 pounds, or 5,000 pounds? Because when you can't find it, that's when your recall is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger because you can't say where it went, which products it went into, and the FDA or the USDA or CFIA is most likely going to make you have a bigger recall because you cannot say with certainty that it didn't contain that contaminated ingredient. When you do a mock recall, can you find all the product? Can you find it quickly? So you're going to be auditing those things as well, even though you may also be on the internal mock recall team. But these are the things, these are the big issues. Now, I'm not going to dismiss some other things, but I wanted to bring to your attention that those are things that you want to do about 4 times a year. Now you say, well, what should I do with all the other things? Because I got to audit everything at least once a year. Well, these things I would do at least twice a year. Because again, these are some key programs, but they're not the critical key programs. But they're certainly key programs to show that I'm doing what I need to do to be in compliance with CFIA, USDA, FDA, etc. And I'm putting out a safe product every time. And you can see on here, we've got food defense and food fraud, which are 2 recently emphasized things by the FDA and the USDA. Because obviously what we have to be careful is that we understand that in April next year, you have to have a pretty solid documented food defense program. We actually teach a class on that. It's a 1-day class, and I would encourage you to go to it because whatever food defense program you may have now may not be in compliance with the requirements that are going into effect next year. Food fraud is new to all of us. And obviously it's a little vague right now exactly what that means, but be careful to understand that food fraud is not food defense. It could be part of food defense, but it isn't food defense. And we've already had one of our customers who actually gave us a food defense as their food fraud program. And that's not obviously meeting the requirements of GFSI. Food fraud is a billion-dollar industry according to the FDA, and going to get even more serious in the future, because now we've got people entering into food fraud who never thought about doing that and making money at it, and now they're finding they can make money. But they're not food safety experts. So therefore, the chances are they're going to put out something that's fraudulent that not only is going to cost you money, but it's going to jeopardize the health of the consumer. I would recommend that when you do the outside grounds, you make it a little bit more than the outside grounds. So when things here, I would say to you, when you're out there, yes, look at the things that involve the outside grounds, but while you're out there, also do the rodent bait stations. Why not? You're walking around the outside of the building, so you add that to this audit, and it doesn't increase it beyond about an hour and a half, depending on the size of your building, but you can go out and pop open about 1 in every 4 rodent bait stations, see if there's bait in there. Take a look at the employee outside eating smoking areas while you're there, to make sure that there's a place for them to put all their trash. While you're walking around, pull on all those doors that you said shouldn't come open. And therefore, you're checking your plant food defense program by making sure that the doors are all locked. That when people pull down dock doors, they don't just pull them down, they also lock them. Otherwise, you can put your fingers under them and lift them up. Your program says that all visitors have to sign in. So it'd be a good chance now to go in the lobby and see if people are signing in, see if they're signing out, see if your reception person is asking for ID, which would be part of a food defense program, and that you can verify you know who came in your building, when they came in your building, and when they left. And that you actually did verify they were who they said they were. I would add the contractor sign-in logs as well, because you really should be having contractors sign in every day, sign out. You should have some training records on them, because it says that you should train them in all your food safety requirements, so that when they go out in the plant, they don't violate any of your food safety requirements. So again, take a look at those logs, see if they are out. Now, if you let truck drivers in, which most people don't these days, then what are you showing that the truck driver signs in and signs out? So now we've taken outside grounds and made it a little bigger than outside grounds, but it's still a very small audit, but you can do a lot more when you're walking around the outside than just looking at the bushes and the trees and pooling water, etc. The idea here is to just give you an idea how you can combine different things into one audit that do relate to each other and allow you to get more out of that audit, so that you can find your own nonconformities before anybody else does. So now when you're talking about building maintenance, including preventive maintenance, then yes, you're going to walk around the facility looking at floors, walls, and ceilings and all that, but do go and look at some preventive maintenance records to see if the preventive maintenance is being done at the frequency that it's stated in your preventive maintenance program. And if it isn't, this would be a good time to catch it, find out why. Is it lack of resources? Is it lack of time? Is it lack of personnel? Or did it just not pop up on the schedule because you don't have a system that reminds people to do it? Don't forget to look in the maintenance area. Now we're talking again, if you've got a maintenance guy on your team, the maintenance person shouldn't be doing the maintenance area as part of the internal audit. Pull those contractor files where you said they've been trained and you got something in writing and they signed it on file. Pull those contractor contracts and see what they have been authorized to do. Take a look at your equipment breakdown log, because if your equipment keeps breaking down, it means that your preventive maintenance is not being done at the frequency it should, unless you can come up with another reason why it broke down. So you may need to increase your preventive maintenance frequency if you continue to have breakdowns. And you've seen that in your GFSI audits. When you do have issues, somebody should have done a root cause analysis and a corrective action, preventive action to all previous issues. So let's take a look at that. But if you wrote it up in a previous internal audit, it's a good time for you to follow up on the internal audit to see if things that you identified in the previous internal audit had actually been corrected and that the problems had gone away, whether that be the outside door audit, the inside building maintenance audit, the process audit, the employee practices audit. Make sure you follow up on previous audits. So let's talk about identifying audit hotspots. And it doesn't mean you're just going to audit the hot issues, but these are the ones that you do want to spend more time on. These are the ones that you do want to do more frequently. And these are the ones that if you have issues and you don't catch them, they could result in product out there that could get people sick, hopefully not kill them, could result in recalls, could result in regulatory action, could result in lawyers coming after you. So what are the hot issues with the FDA and the USDA right now? Critical control points are what they call process preventive controls with the FDA. Environmental monitoring programs, both for the FDA and USDA. Allergen controls. Supplier approval programs. These are the hot issues today because the regulators know that these things, when they're under control, companies don't have problems. But if they don't have them under control, then they have problems, which result in recalls, people are getting sick, etc. So what the regulator is saying to you, you have to have preventive programs in place. And then, unfortunately, when things go wrong, you got to react. But some companies only react when they have problems. That's not the way, obviously, to run a business. So what are your internal audits intended to do? They're intended to find that you are in compliance. So you go out with the mindset, I'm going out to audit to see if I'm in compliance. And by doing that, you will find those incidences where you had not been in compliance. And hopefully they're minor. Hopefully they're easily correctable. Hopefully you can do a root cause analysis and correct the issue and bring it back under control. But if you're only going to audit once a year, you're going to discover some problems when your records have been going for months indicating that you had problems and you weren't catching it. And remember, the regulators can look at all your records. USDA has always been able to do that, but the FDA can now do that. And they're going to go back up to 2 years. So if you just catch it just before the GFSI auditor comes in, or you just did an audit locally just before the regulator came in, and you think the regulator is going to judge you on what they see when they're in there, or the GFSI auditor is only going to judge what he sees the day he or she is in there, they're not. They're going to go back and look at your records. And they could go back 2 years and find issues that you had not found, but you should have found. So that's why we talk about the pre-op sanitation records, supply approval program, traceability programs, and all your food safety plan hazard records should be done on a fairly frequent basis, and I'm recommending 4 times a year. Now, this may be a little longer than a 1.5 to 2 hour audit to go through your food safety plans and look at all the records, but that one may become a 4-hour audit. But a lot of the other audits can fit in that 1 to 3 hours, done by people who've had training. Now, remember, the auditor has to know as much as the person who is running that product. They need to know as much about the parameters that that product is being measured against. Don't send somebody to audit something they don't understand. And that is one of the challenges we have as third-party auditors. We have to increase the skills of our auditors. We've done that. We put them through the preventive controls for human food. We put them through quality training. We've given them food defense training. But the regulators are also having the same issue. They're not skilled in everything either. So therefore, what they're doing, they change their role from an inspector to an investigator, the FDA did. And what they're doing now, they're sending in more experienced investigators into your plants, ones who've been in your type of plant before, ones who understand your processes, understand what should be your process preventive controls or your critical control points. So you are going to have a much more thorough audit done by a regulator. So your internal audits need to be done by people, again, who have that type of knowledge. So when they walk into a department, they walk into an area, they know exactly what they're looking for, they know what it has to be in compliance, and they know what it will be if it's out of compliance. So remember, when you're sampling your records, how many records should I look at and for what? Well, I would concentrate to start with on the regulatory hot issues, which we've said are process preventive controls, allergen preventive controls, sanitation preventive controls if you're making a ready-to-eat product, so environmental monitoring, and supplier records if you're having your supplier control a hazard. So do you have those records? That'll be interesting when you go to pull those records and you don't have everything, or when you do look at it, you find out it isn't as complete as it should be, or the verifier has apparently gone past something they should have caught, because that's what you've got in the way of a verifier, is somebody who's supposed to catch the problems for you, and as an internal auditor, you're just basically looking to make sure they're doing also what they're supposed to be doing. Well, if you've got verifiers who are not doing their job conscientiously, you need to move on and get somebody else to do it. This would be a good time to catch it on your internal audits. Now, don't make it personal. In all these audits, you shouldn't be naming people. You should basically be identifying the problem, identifying a job title, maybe. But the point is, you're trying not to make somebody out as the person who failed to do something. You're trying to make out that something didn't get done and then giving them help in correcting it. You have the unique role as an internal auditor that you can be the auditor and you can be the consultant, and therefore you can be part of the problem and you can be part of the solution. A regulator can't do both sides, nor can a GFSI auditor. So therefore, that's why you don't make it personal, because you can go out and help everybody correct the problem. It is your problem, it's your plans, it's your process. So therefore, one of the things I'll be checking is, are they recording everything on the correct form? Is it the correct one up to date? And are they saving it? And are you saving it to a protected system so that it's retrievable when the FDA walks in and says, I want to see your records? They want to see them immediately. And if they can't see them immediately, they only give you 24 hours to get into them. So it's going to be pretty bad when you go, well, I don't know where they are, or we lost them, or our computer got corrupted. It's a good time for you to catch that before they do. When you're looking through these records, see if there are any deviations that weren't caught by the employee making the records, weren't caught by the verifier. And if they were caught, did they have a root cause analysis and a corrective action to go with them? And yes, you have to write that down. You have to write it down for GFSI, and now you have to write it down for the regulators, because the regulator's attitude is if you don't write it down, you didn't do it. And you say, well, that's a little unfair, but that's, remember, they're the guardians of public safety, and they want to see something in writing that you did what you said you did to correct the problem when you found it, versus you just said you corrected it. You want to go out and observe and interview the employees doing that task, whether they're doing a receiving, or whether they're measuring a pH, or whether they're doing a pre-op, or whether it's a pasteurized operator. Go out and observe them, interview them, ask them questions like, what temperature should it be when you're pasteurizing? What is the time that goes with it? Ask them if they know where they got that from. See if they know the scientific basis of it. Maybe an hourly employee doesn't know that, but a supervisor should. Question them, because the FDA is going to do that. The GFSI audit is going to do that. So you need to practice, because one, it makes your employees used to the fact that people will ask them questions. It helps you identify where they're a little vague on their answers. It gives you the opportunity to give them information later to say, hey, that answer wasn't really as good as it should have been. Let's go over what you should have known and what you should have said, so that next time the employee knows what to say. Be real careful now. In America, if you lie to a public official, it's jail time coming. So you cannot lie to a federal official. So make sure your employees understand that they should not try to lie or deliberately lie to an FDA person when they're interviewing them. So how often should I do these regulatory hot issues? 4 times a year. But if I'm having problems, I'll increase the frequency. And if you can show that you're not having problems, and you could justify dropping that to 3 times a year, then you would be able to justify that, because I'm not having issues. Our records show we're not having issues. Our internal audit show we're not having issues. Our GFSI score shows we're not having issues. And when regulators come in, they never write us up with a 483. Maybe you can back the frequency down from 4 times a year to 3. But don't start getting down to 2 and then down to 1, because when things get away from you, you don't want to know about it after about 9 or 10 months. So therefore, the frequency should be such that you're not going to be out of compliance for long before you catch it. Now, your verifiers are supposed to be doing that on a regular basis. So therefore, that's why internal audits don't have to be as often as verifying. And remember, when we're talking about verifying, the USDA requires you to verify all of your critical control points before you ship a product, before you ship it. The FDA now gives you 7 working days. But my caution again there is don't ship anything until you verified your process preventive controls, allergen preventive controls. In other words, you verified your process, your preventive controls records before you ship a product, even though legally for FDA you could ship it. So how often should I sample records? Well, you're going to sample them back to the last time you did an internal audit or an external audit. So if you're going to do an audit 4 times a year, you're going to go back 4 months. Or 3 months, sorry, 3 months. But if you're going to do something twice a year, you're going to go back 6 months. And if you're going to do something once a year, you're going to go back 12 months. Select at random 5 dates. Just pull 5 dates at random that you know the plant was running and pick records for each shift if applicable. Don't concentrate just on first shift. You may actually have your better supervisors. You may have your better employees. You may have your better controls on first shift. I hope you got them on second shift as well. But if second shift has got a less trained hourly employee, or you've got less supervision, then maybe you want to pick some more records on second shift to see if you're having issues on second shift that you're not having on first shift. If you find a problem, again, don't jump all over that problem until you go either side to see if it's a trend. You are going to get isolated problems. The point is your verifier should have caught them. You should catch it if the verifier didn't. But now if you go either side of that problem date and you start to find issues, then you got a trend which is more serious. If problems are found previously, when previous audits you did, then increase the number you do when you go back the next time, just to address that environmental monitoring issue or that pasteurization issue or whatever that issue was. When you're doing your internal audits, don't go and question the same employee every time. If you got 2 receiving people, one time you interview one, another time you interview another. If you got about 3 QC techs, again varies. If you got 5 metal detectors, then why keep going back to the same one to evaluate it to see if the records are good? And also maybe you would have them put the test pieces through there. You would want to vary it across so you get a good cross section of how things are happening with different employees, different equipment, different products, different processes, etc. So therefore, again, make sure you're getting the maximum out of your internal audits. They're for you. Yes, they're going to make you comply with GFSI. Yes, they're going to make sure that you catch regulatory issues. But basically, when you think about it, it's for you to make sure you're doing a good job every day, every product, and that when you've got opportunities, you catch them. And when those opportunities are corrected, you have what they call continuous improvements. So I'm going to have Holly do a little more, another poll with you.
Yeah, sure. So a very timely one, I think. So how does your team prepare for internal audits? And again, you can select multiple responses. So let me launch here. So maybe you have a team member attend an external auditing training. That's part of your preparation. Maybe you already have a cross-functional team established. Maybe it's that you continually communicate to management how it's a value-added task. And perhaps the other one could be that it's already a strategic priority, to Dr. Bob's point, that that's how you measure improvement. So it's already been identified. So we'll give it about 30 seconds here, Dr. Bob. And I guess most of the folks on the call today, Dr. Bob, are already have a management system in place, I expect. But where would you see most folks sort of focusing their efforts in terms of getting their team prepared for the internal audit process?
Well, maybe you're communicating to management it's a value-added task, and therefore getting management support in doing the corrective actions, the root causes, making the changes, and putting the adequate resources behind the results of the audit.
Yeah, I imagine much of it starts with external training as well. We'll see here. Give it a few more seconds. That's great. Thanks, everyone. So let me close and share. Yes, training, 32% and 34%. So really sort of the top two is that they attend external training and build a cross-functional team. Those are the top two.
All right. Well, obviously, one of the things, again, we do offer that internal auditor training. We'd only be too happy to have you attend one of our classes or even come into your facility and do training. But let's talk about document with advocacy. So what am I left with if I'm doing most things, or not most things, doing a lot of things quarterly, and then doing some things every 6 months? So what am I going to do maybe once a year? Well, obviously, your management systems, your organizational chart, and the things listed here, these things shouldn't change much. So basically, looking at these once a year should be fine, unless you've made major changes. But it is important you look at these, because if you've got somebody on an organizational chart that doesn't work for you anymore, you should have caught that and changed it. If you've added a new job or something, you should have that. You should test your mock recall program every year, etc. So therefore, even though these things are only once a year, they're extremely important that the person who does them does put in the time to look at them in detail, make sure they are up to date, make sure that any changes you made are happening on the floor, and not miss this as being one of the things that they are not spending the time on, and then along comes somebody to catch the problem. But remember, the FDA can look at anything these days. They can take copies of anything. They can walk out with your food safety plan. They can take copies of all your records, and you cannot stop them. Be a little concerned if they start taking them, because they're not taking them to fill file cabinets. They're taking them to get a second opinion on. And maybe they'll come back and say they're okay after they get the second opinion. But I would hope that you have made sure they're okay before they take them by doing your internal audits. Now, having done the internal audit, you've got to write the report. And you got to communicate that report to the most senior person in your facility. And for those of you who have seen where the Food Safety Modernization Act has gone, it is said that the most important person in your facility, as far as the regulator, is the most senior person in your facility, and it is your responsibility to keep that person up to date. If you look in your SQF audit, it used to say that you had to have a monthly meeting with your top executive to talk about food safety issues. It wasn't required until Edition 8 came out that you actually had to document that. So be real careful now. You have to document it. The intent in the past was you documented it, but because it didn't say it, some people would tell the auditor I had the meeting, but there wasn't any records of it. Who was in attendance? What did you talk about? What was the follow-up? So make sure you're doing that now, that the top person is being kept informed and you have documented proof that you're doing that. Now, when you write this report for your audit, you have to determine who's going to do the corrective issues. Are you going to delegate it off to maintenance? You're going to delegate it off to sanitation? You're going to delegate it off to QA? Who's going to do it? And then who's going to do the corrective action, preventive action after they've done the root cause analysis to determine what the problem is? So who's on your root cause analysis team? Because you again need a team. You don't want to make those root cause analysis yourself. You don't want the auditor who did the audit report to be the only one who determines what the root cause is. You want to involve supervisors, people on the floor, etc., in determining why did we have a problem that day, what caused this issue, why didn't the verifier catch it, whatever is the deficiency you're finding. Then you have to determine who's going to follow up to ensure the issues were corrected. Because all you do is write a report. Somebody pencil whips a root cause. Somebody says we're going to do something. You assign it to somebody, and then nobody follows up. Then what you're going to find 3 months later, 6 months later, the person you assigned it to didn't get around to doing it because they didn't have enough time, because they didn't have enough people, because they didn't have enough money, or because they really didn't think it was that important, so they didn't do anything, and now you've got an issue. And remember now, all these records are available to a regulator. And the regulator is going to be looking for things like that. And you're going to have a difficult time having a good conversation with a regulator when you had issues, you identified them yourself, and you didn't do anything to get rid of them. Because you've got to demonstrate continuous improvement. You've got to demonstrate the problems go away and they don't come back. And then you've got to determine when I'm going back to do the next scheduled audit. And if I'm having lots of issues, I'm going to move up the frequency of that next scheduled audit. So instead of doing it in another 3 months from now, I may only want to go a month from now to follow up and see if all the things we talked about were corrected and the things we put into effect to correct them were effective. And that's another word the FDA is using these days, the word effective. Having a program is one thing. Having the program on the floor and being followed is another thing. But the most important thing in the regulator's mind is that you've got an effective program and you can prove it. That's also in your GFSI audits. So 7 tips, and then we will do questions and answers. You want an internal audit team, minimum of 1 to 3 people, not just one person. You want to assign to them different things to do, and they can't audit their own work. You have to validate your audit scope. So how big is that small 1 to 3 hour audit going to be? What's going to be included in it? So that I make sure that I'm doing things at the right audit frequency. I'm going to do the hot issues more frequently than the less hot issues. But I got to be mindful that when I'm auditing those hot spots, they are regulatory things that the regulator is going to look at. You know, the regulator don't think is going to come in and look at your pest control program unless you're having pest issues, or look at some of the other things. You have to look at all them. But the regulator is certainly going to go and look at all of your food safety plan records, all your HACCP records, all your allergen records, your labeling, and all the things that cause the 3 biggest reasons for recalls: allergens, Listeria monocytogenes, and Salmonella. You need to sample your records, and the amount of records you look at will depend upon what do you find in the records you looked at. Should I look at more because I'm seeing issues? Is it a hot issue where I've had problems in the past, so I should look at more records? Is it something where we show that we don't have very many problems ever, so therefore I'll look at less records? And don't forget that everything has to be looked at. So even if it's something you only want to look at once a year, you have to do it. And most important is, having spent all this time gathering all this stuff, writing an audit report, it'll be real tragic if management doesn't put the support behind it to take those post-audit considerations and use them to make you a much more efficient operation. I'm going to turn it back over to Holly to see what questions we've got so I can possibly give you answers.
That's great. Thank you very much, Dr. Baugh. Very insightful. Cool. So a couple of questions here. Let's start with one here. When are we required to be compliant to food fraud requirements? Same question actually of, excuse me, food defense requirements.
Well, there's 2 different answers to that. One is a regulatory answer, and the FDA hasn't issued guidelines yet, but they've told you to be working towards it. And the other one is GFSI has it in all their audits now, because it wasn't in the SQF audit till this year, but it was in the BRC audit. And therefore, when you talk about FSSC 22000, it's there. So the answer is, if it's GFSI, you have to be there now.
Yep. Okay, very good. Thank you. What happens if you're a very small organization? 1 to 3 people for an audit team can be the entire company. So what happens when you sort of scale down there? What's your recommendation around there?
Then you're right. You're starting out to be into a 1 person, but you can still be 2 people. So if you say, well, we are real small, so what would the other person do, who maybe is the owner or something? He could audit your role in the company while you audit everybody else's role. And you're right, you have to recognize that not everybody has 10 people or 15 people to pick an audit team from.
Okay, fair point. Where can information be found for the internal auditor training? How often are training? Okay, so this question is from Jeff. So I'll just make a note to the broader group as well. We'll send a few links to training courses in the event you're interested in participating in training. There's a number of different channels that we offer, a number of different courses. Actually, if you want to click forward one, Dr. Bob, there's a couple of courses listed there just for a sampling, but we'll provide a couple of links in the event you want to look at the course overview and the dates and all that good stuff. So we'll send that out on the post follow-up along with the recording and the deck. Let me see here.
Yeah, we just updated our food safety internal auditor training because, like everything, it becomes more and more involved. And so we just took the whole thing and just redid it. And we're going to start offering that training again. We just had a hiatus when we weren't doing it for a couple of months while we redid it because we don't want to teach something that is not up to date.
Yeah, not relevant. Yep. Can you give some examples of corrective action, preventive action issues?
Well, that depends. It's hard to do that because it depends on what your problem is. And because it could be you have to retrain the employees. Be real careful. That tends to be the easy one. We always blame the employees for every time something goes wrong. And we say, okay, we'll just retrain the employee because it obviously was their problem. No, if you have to keep saying retrain the employee, then you have to look at your training materials. You have to look at your trainer. You obviously not got a format that's getting it across to your employee if you feel that the employee doesn't understand and therefore it's a training issue. But be real careful. The FDA is a little concerned about how many times they go in a plant and there's an issue and then they identify it in a 483 and then they leave and then you have to respond to the FDA and then your response is retrain the employees, retrain the employees, retrain the employees. That is not the case. Like on sanitation, you could say retrain the employees. Well, did they have the right soap? Did they have the right amount of time? Did they have the right equipment? Did they have a good supervisor? I can come up with a lot of things that maybe the hourly employee is doing the cleaning. It's not their fault.
Yeah, okay. This is an interesting question. Can you comment on what would be the difference between an internal audit and a HACCP system reassessment?
That would be the same thing because what you're doing is reassessing the thing. But again, one of the things on the internal audit is more that you're looking at your current. Well, no, I'll make that difference. The internal audit is looking to see if you're doing what you say you're doing with regard to your current HACCP plan, your current food safety plan. A reassessment is you're starting to have issues and therefore your food safety plan, your HACCP plans coming under question now is not being thorough enough because you are putting out product that is a tendency to be a threat to the consumer. So then you would have to reassess your HACCP plan. So it'd be much more detailed. I'd put together the HACCP team to do that versus the internal audit team. Yet some of those people are going to be on both teams.
Okay. Can the internal audit be performed by a third-party auditor?
Oh, yeah, that's one of the things you can do. And in fact, we offer that service if we are not your auditing company. We can come in and do an auditor a gap assessment on you, or we can have a consultant come in and do that. And the answer is yes, but we can't do that if we're a certified body because then that comes under the impartiality. But we can if we're not. Now that's just for GFSI audits. When it's a second party audit, we can help you on both sides because there is no conflict there.
Okay. Do you recommend that the internal audit team be represented not just by managers but hourly employees to create a cross-functionality team?
Oh yeah, I think that would be great. If you can get one of your employees who's an hourly employee who says, I'd like to be involved in this team and is going to take it seriously, not just an opportunity to get off the line and do something different. No, something they want to do differently. They would bring different eyes. What you're going to make sure is now don't have the audit become punitive. Well, somebody came into my department and they really wrote us up. So I'm going to go in their department and really write them up. That is not the approach. So again, that doesn't matter whether that's a supervisor, foreman, or hourly employee. Don't get into being vindictive against another department. But yeah, the more people you can involve at all levels, the better off your internal audit team is.
Okay. Where can you find the most up-to-date FDA or USDA audit findings that the regulators are looking at?
Well, that's a good question, because obviously one of the things is warning letters is one source of knowing what they're looking at. Another one is looking at recalls, both USDA and FDA. Another one is going to the preventive controls for human foods, where they lay out a whole lot of stuff there. And if you're into animal foods, they have a class for that as well. And they highlight in there their hot issues. What's interesting, in the foreign supplier verification program, the FDA has built in how to handle the FDA. And that's something that you want to practice as well, is how to handle a regulator before the regulator comes in.
Yeah. Can you provide some your opinion, Dr. Bob, this is from Rhonda, on how does an internal auditor get across the idea to a newly certificated company staff that finding of nonconformances is not the end of the world, that they shouldn't be fearful of discovery of a nonconformance?
Well, that's a very good point, Rhonda, and I hear where you're coming from. And the fact is that's why I said don't make it punitive, and make it a discovery, make it that you're on the team to help solve the problem, and you're not in there just finding out what they're doing wrong and going to beat up on somebody. And so therefore, you're right. You want to create a positive out of what is always tends to be a negative, and nobody likes to be audited. So keep people's names out of it. Don't try to identify individual employers as being the one that you think is causing the problem. But then be willing to go back out and then take that employee and work with them to get them where they need to be if it's an employee problem, and make a positive out of what some people would think is a negative. It's all based on continuous improvement. It's all based on your company being the one that doesn't have any recalls, doesn't have any regulatory issues, and does really good on your GFSI audits.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, very good. Can email communication be considered as training?
Very difficult to do it by email, because the point is, do you really feel that the employee understood what you were saying in an email versus the reaction? So even with this webinar, I'm hoping you all listened. I hope you all understood. We're getting questions and answers at the end, which is good, because sometimes the question and answers are more valuable than what I just talked about for the last 45 minutes. But you're not going to get that if you're just going to do emails, because some employers will just basically indicate they understood everything you said and they didn't.
Yep, sure. Okay, could you just summarize? So I'll read you the question, Dr. Bob. I think that the end goal here is to get a summary of the cadence of audits. So the question is, how many total internal audits should be done per year? Follow-up is 4 times per year for those issues and 2 times for the other, then 1 time for the rest. Sort of you need to, it sounds like a lot. So what's sort of the recommendation in terms of the internal audit process per year?
Well, again, as I said, if you're going to do 4, some of them 4 times a year, then each of those is 4. And if you have 2 or 3 of them, that's 12. And if you're going to do, again, about 4 to 5 of them twice a year, then you're going to have that. You are going to have maybe 20 little audits. But the 20 little audits shouldn't take you any longer than what it would take you to do the whole system and just do it once, when it doesn't have very much value in just doing it once. But when the auditors come in, they spend that amount of time, particularly if they're going to come in now and do your pre-op and they're going to do sanitation. You're going to have auditors in your plan for anything up to 2 full days, 16, 18 hours. So when you look at that number of audits, and again, as I said, you can decrease the frequency if you can prove you're not finding anything, and the regulator and the GFSI auditor would support you in that. If you've got a track record of not finding anything, and the regulator and the GFSI auditor don't find anything, then you can decrease your frequency.
Fair point. You'd hate to have a larger, more extensive audit and then realize that you need to increase the cadence. That would be certainly a more difficult scenario. Can you comment on electronic documentation? Is this approved by GFSI or FDA?
The answer is yes and yes. The FDA says electronic records are now approved, provided that everybody entering information into the record has their own password, and every verifier has their own password. And if you don't have that capability, then the electronic records will not be acceptable. The FDA also says electronic records acceptable if it's off-site, and you can bring it back to on-site by just getting onto the computer and bringing it up. GFSI has recognized electronic records as well, but again, it's the same thing. Can you be able to identify the employee who entered that data versus people pointing the finger at each other and saying, that wasn't me, that was him, or who was her?
Yeah, okay, very good. This isn't a question, it's a comment, but I think a very valid one for the group to hear. I think the FDA's hotspot audit should add food defense program, pest control program, and FDA registration verification. I've always been audited from the regulatory personnel for these issues. Good insight.
Yeah, that's a good thing. I agree with that, particularly as they're putting a lot of emphasis on the fact that some companies registered back in 2002 when the Bioterrorism Act came out were supposed to re-register every 2 years and somehow forgot to do it. When the FDA cleaned out their website, their documentation several years ago, maybe 2-3 years ago now, half the companies disappeared off the website, meaning that they were no longer in business. Well, we know they are in business, so therefore half of them became illegal right then. So make sure not only are you registered, but you're also registering every year between October the 1st and December the 31st in even years. So this year, whether you're in the United States or you're supplying product to the United States, you have to be registered with the FDA.
Yeah, okay. 2 more questions, we'll close it off. Is environmental monitoring required for the manufacture of rigid food packaging? And if so, to what degree, given the low risk of this type of packaging?
No, it's not, because if you look at the Food Safety Modernization Act, packaging is not required to meet the Food Safety Modernization Act. What is ironical, foreign packaging suppliers are. Environmental monitoring is for people who are making ready-to-eat food products, not food packaging. Now, if you've got a customer requires you to do environmental monitoring because they're concerned that you may get something on the packaging that will cause them an issue, then that is more of you fulfilling your customer's requirements than you're fulfilling a regulatory requirement.
Okay, very good. Last question for today. What would be the best GFSI standard that would cover processing aids that come into direct contact with food? Processing aids are not conducive to biological, chemical, or physical contamination.
Well, I'm not sure that's true. I think a lot of processing aids have allergens in them. So therefore, you would need to know about the allergens. I think some of them will support. I've gone into plants where actually they found the stereomonocyte charginess only after their equipment's been running for a while, when it's oozing out of the bearings, when it is living in the oil and the grease. So I think there's a little bit more than what was stated there about biological, chemical, and physical contaminants being in processing aids or adhesives or lubricants, et cetera, and even inks that are being printed on packaging are being found sometimes have allergens in them, which then rub off on the food contact surface and cause the person who's going to package something in your packaging to get an allergen in their product from the allergen that was on the ink that you printed on the carton for them.
Okay, good, very good. With that, I'll close off the Q&A session here. Dr. Bob, thank you very much for your presentation, and thanks to everyone for attending. I'll close the webinar. We'll send a link to the recording, the deck, and some links for courses within the next few business days. Thanks very much.
Bye.